Welcome to Crying Out Cloud, the podcast that will make you laugh, cry, and reconsider all of your cloud security fears. I'm Eden from the CTO team at Wiz, and I'm here with my amazing co-host, Amitai from the threat research team. And today we are excited to welcome our very special guest, Sam Curry. Sam is an ethical hacker, bug bounty hunter, and pen testing specialist renowned for uncovering critical vulnerabilities in many web applications. In 2018, Sam founded Palisade, a cybersecurity consulting firm, which was later acquired by Yuga Labs, where he currently works. He has disclosed many, many vulnerabilities in major organizations such as Apple and Tesla and many more big names that we all know. And Sam continues to share his expertise at conferences like DEF CON and Black Hat briefings, and we get to have him here today. So Sam, welcome to Crying Out Cloud.
Oh yeah, awesome. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Will you tell everyone where you're calling us from, where you're at?
Yeah, I'm calling from my hometown in Omaha, Nebraska. It's got pretty nice weather right now. It's like 50 degrees Fahrenheit, but just got back from a little trip, so I'm kind of like on a different sleep schedule. But yeah, having a great time here.
Amazing. Well, we woke you up early because of the time difference, so thank you.
Oh, no worries at all. Yeah, excited to be here.
Cool. So we like to kick off when we have guests with a speed round of questions, so everyone gets to know you a little bit. Amitai, do you want to start it off?
Yeah, I'd like to know what your favorite thing about Nebraska is.
Oh, that's a really good question. So Omaha, Nebraska is kind of like one of the places in the world, I think, where it's like the most specific like geolocation for like steak. So we have like farmers with tons and tons of cows, right? So like Nebraska has this thing called Omaha Steaks, and Omaha Steaks is like a worldwide shipping thing for like some of the best steaks in the world. Like sometimes as a gift, I'll get like a dry ice package and then just like send somebody a steak. And there's a few restaurants here, and like growing up here and being around the age of like a bunch of kind of like college students almost, a lot of my friends work at like restaurants as like servers. So we'll kind of like go to different restaurants and try out steaks. And I'm like a huge steak fan, so that's kind of my favorite part about Nebraska is like the proximity. You know, like I'll be somewhere else like on a trip or something, and I'll see on the menu like an Omaha steak. I'm like, well, I have access to the source, so that's my favorite Nebraska.
So do you search for Omaha steak when you're abroad or when you're out of state?
Yeah, sometimes. My girlfriend gets mad at me because like I'll order Omaha steaks when we're like a different place, and she's like, "You gotta try something else." I'm like, "No, I know what I like. You know, I'll try this here."
I'm with you. I like what I like, and I'll eat what I eat.
You got into hacking quite young. I read online that you were like 12. What pulled you into this world, and at what point were you like, I'm hooked? This isn't just a little summer activity as a 12-year-old.
Yeah, so I think I was super young, but I got pulled into because of like video games, right? So I was playing a bunch of like these like online shooters or like MMOs, and there's a few communities of people, and I think I like stumbled into this like one community where one of the players was just like absurdly rich. Like the player was just like, had more money than like everybody else on the server. And I messaged him, I'm like, hey, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I've got like these hacks and cheats. And I was like, I don't believe you. There's no way you can do that. And then like I kind of like kept asking him, and he kept getting kind of like annoyed because I was like kept asking him for more information. But he invited me to this like forum, and I joined the forum, and I had like the lowest permission user. Like it was just like this guy's a noob, treat him like a noob, right? But like I kind of like scraped the forum all day, and like eventually found out how to do some of the stuff, and then eventually it became, it was kind of like game hacking at first, like cheat engine and all these like lower level like disassembly stuff. But eventually it became like web security because a lot of the games had like these donation shops or like these stores where you could buy items. And since the gaming community was very like small and like there was, maybe like 100 people running servers, it was very like cloak and dagger where like different server owners are like trying to hack each other. And like there's this community of people of like, like MyBB, like forum exploits and like cool like back and forth like hacking. So even though it wasn't like necessarily like super, by the books, like everybody was still doing like fun like hacking stuff.
I think there's a lot of like every once in a while, people sort of realize that like anti-cheat mechanisms are one of the most sophisticated things in computer security. and like a lot of product developers have a lot to learn from people who develop anti-cheat mechanisms and people who break anti-cheat mechanisms. So it's interesting that like that's like where you started from. So that's like sort of how you got into the world.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree because it's funny because it's like if you're some developer who works for like some random company and like you're doing a project and you're kind of like half asleep doing it, it definitely makes more sense that like someone who's built like an entire game and like they're in charge of like securing their game, like they're gonna take it really personal and it becomes like I totally agree. It's like a lot more secure a lot of the times. But yeah.
It's cool. Then you got there, and then you got to car companies where you found some interesting vulnerabilities, which made us wonder, did those make you like hesitate about driving a car? Did you do it safety? Do you still drive a car?
I'll still drive a car, but I'll decline like a lot of times. Like if car companies want extra information about me, I'll kind of decline it or just press the Ags or like rewards programs or things like that. But luckily, I'm still driving. I feel safe-ish, you know.
What's your dream car?
Oh, dream car. I'm gonna mispronounce it, but it's either Porsche or Porsche. I'm not really a super huge car person, but the either like a 911 Turbo S or like GT3, very typical, but they're great cars. They look really cool. And I had like a Lego or a Hot Wheels one as a kid. So,
Okay, so I'm going to ask a leading question. Let's say you won the lottery, and I'm just going to throw a random number out here, $249,999, for example. What do you do with the money?
well, check who sent it. You know, if it was all rightfully mine, probably buying that car. But if it happened like it did like a few years ago, where Google accidentally sent me $250,000, I will call Google, and if I can't get in contact with Google, I'll tweet about it, and then they'll email me. Where Google, who had accidentally sent me $250,000, will send it right back to them. Um, but yeah, like actually using it, yeah, buying that car.
Nice. Crazy story, by the way.
Yeah, it was super interesting. Like, I think what had happened was like I had done basically, if, like for context for everybody, like I had been doing bug bounties for Google, and they had like saved my bank account somewhere in some internal Google system. And then one day I just woke up and I was checking my bank account and I saw that there was like an extra $250,000, and I clicked it and it was like Google. So like I emailed their customer support, but like Google's like notoriously hard to get in contact with. You know, like you can't really, if you reset your Gmail password, like, or if you forget access, like you can't really talk to a human being. So I'd like opened the thread on like a few email lines with them, and nobody really responded or like took me serious. So I just like tweeted a photo like, "Hey Google, like, can I keep this?" You know, like, and they didn't like that, so they told me to send it back. So
True,
I
by
wonder how many
the
other people this has happened to that didn't return the money.
way.
yeah, 100%. Like I was reading online and I thought I saw like someone mention like they received $10,000 or something like that. But I have friends who work for Amazon, right? And for Amazon, they do like a lot of like red team stuff. I can't give like I guess too much info, but like one of the things is like they'll try to steal money financially, right? It's like the red team exercise is like, hey, can we steal money from Amazon? And they said that like a lot of times, if the amount is like a trivial amount, which to them is like under $100,000, they'll just like forget about it, which is kind of crazy. And it's
Trivial.
like I want, yeah, I guess for Amazon, trivial, but very makes you wonder about like a lot of things. Yeah.
I hope it isn't like their version of like a vendor's version of hush money. Like we'll just scatter a bunch of bounties to a bunch of different bounty hunters, just in the hopes that maybe they leave us alone for a while.
That'd be nice. I definitely leave them alone for a while then. Maybe I'll like hack back on Google for a few weeks and then see if they bother me, bother my bank account.
Okay, last question of our speed round, and arguably what we're most fascinated to ask. Would you tell us the true story of how you were wrongfully detained at an airport? And are you now afraid of flying?
A tiny bit, yeah. So I was on a trip to Japan with a couple of my friends, and we were flying back into Washington Dulles Airport. And when we were in the Washington Dulles Airport, I was kind of standing in line, going through the normal like screening process, and I answered everything like great. I was on a vacation with some friends, but then the agent says, "Hey, like it looks like you've been selected for secondary screening," and they walk me to this police officer who's like the kindest, the most patient police officer I've ever met, which kind of raised like internally like a little bit of red flags because I was like, normally these police officers are so mean to you. Like, why is this person so nice? And they're asking me all these questions about where I was. And I was having a really good conversation about like, you know, hey, here's how my trip went, here's what happened. And then they eventually drop me off in the secondary, and I sit down and I'm waiting, and I realize I'm one of like four Americans, like just observationally, like, or I'm out of all the four people there, I'm like the only American. I'm like, okay, like maybe something was like raised, because as like an American citizen, normally you don't really get tapped for secondary. Sometimes you do, if you say the wrong thing or say something about your customs form. But I kind of waited there for a while, and then like three police officers came up, or three TSA officers, and they started asking me more questions. And we unloaded all my bags and kind of looked through everything. And then they eventually brought me to a room. And inside the room were these two guys waiting. And they kind of asked, they said, this is a normal thing. We just wanted to ask more questions. And they started asking more questions. And then it got really particular about like the job I worked at. And I said, like, wait a sec, this is really weird. Like, I'm happy to answer normal like secondary questions. But like, this seems like it's like a thing. And he was like, oh, by the way, and he pulls out this sheet of paper and he says, you've been summoned to like a grand jury in New York to appear about like these crimes. And he mentions like wire fraud, uh, a bunch of
Whoa.
these different things. Yeah. So at that point, I was like, hey, like, can I have my stuff back? Because I'd given them my unlocked device because it's a normal thing you do, in the immigration, process, right? When you assume like, your device is only going to be used for just kind of checking, make sure, X, Y, Z, right? And obviously like privacy advocates will say like, never give your unlocked device, but like the real world thing is like you want to get through the airport, so you're going to give them your unlocked device. So I asked for my device back, and they said no, like we get to do this because it's immigration. So I went to go sit down, and then immediately, like maybe like 10, 20 minutes later, after kind of like sitting there and like picking my arms, like just being really, really nervous, they come back and they say, you're free to go. Here's all your stuff back, but you have to be in New York in a week. So I immediately called my work, and like my work, who I work for a cryptocurrency company, so like they have like lawyers who are involved, and since they asked about my job, like I kind of engaged my work in that sense. But they immediately had lawyers who contacted the Southern District of New York, and they had like a conversation about it. And what they realized was the reason I was being subpoenaed was because my IP address had shown up in logs of an attacker on a website. And what had happened was through a normal part of my day-to-day job, what I'd done while investigating a crypto scam was I'd found a leaked private key of the attacker. And I'd copied that private key over and I plugged it into my MetaMask. And when I plugged it in my MetaMask and authenticated to the website to check if there was any assets like that were left over from the hackers like phishing campaign, if there's anything recoverable that we could like give back to users, my IP address like pinged the website. And what that triggered was the IRS CI, the Criminal Investigative Unit, and the Department of Homeland Security in the U.S. They began like an investigation on me, and they subpoenaed my home like ISP logs. I'm not really sure what fully they had access to, but they had records like in person of like what things I'd been doing, and they began like a full investigation where they actually traveled those two agents, and they basically set up like an intercept thing where when I flew back to the U.S., they were ready for me. But luckily, everything got resolved. My work provided like copies of like, hey, this is what we're doing. It's a normal thing. Why didn't you just ask us? And that's about like, yeah, it's very like, I was already at like a really stressful point in my life. I think the week before that, I mentioned to somebody, I was like, hey, this is like the most stressed I've ever been. And then like, they're like, all right, whoever's in charge was like, all right, we're going to add like one more thing to your box. So like, I was like, all right, well, this is not super good. So, but it was super funny too, right? Because I was actually flying into Washington to hack the United States voting systems as part of an operation. So then I get there and I have to explain to the government people, like, oh, sorry, I'm really stressed because I was detained at the airport. They're like, are you in the right building? Like, shouldn't you be here? But anyway, that.
And I'm sure the agents were thrilled when you told them, "Yeah, I'm here to hack voting systems."
Exactly, right? Like it was a funny conversation because they know that I'm being investigated, and I tell them I'm here to hack voting systems. I think this to anybody who's like a normal officer is like, aha, they spilled the beans, like they're a hacker. It's like no, it's like it's all ethical. Like this is all part of my day job. But alas, luckily it's all resolved now. So
We're going to start with what you do now in your day job. and kind of the world of pen testing. What do you think about the pen testing industry today? And do you think that companies are using pen testing efficiently right now?
Yeah, so the pen testing world is really interesting. So when we started doing pen testing, we started doing pen testing for crypto companies in the age of like the crypto boom, because what we realized is that crypto companies that were like spinning up these websites didn't really have a security team. So we were kind of like doing a lot of things with like bigger exchanges like OpenSea, when they're a little bit smaller, and like these kind of like Bitfinex, like these cryptocurrency exchanges. And what we were doing is like full audits. So we would go in and like actually try to find like, XYZ bugs, right? Before that, I worked at a company called Trust Foundry, and Trust Foundry was more of a traditional pen test company. So we would do like red team exercises or like physical pen tests where we'd like go into a building with a camera and like try things like that, or normal like web application testing. So, and when I worked at both, Trust Foundry and Palisade, and then also like the kind of like HackerOne's like pen test initiative, all the vulnerability hunting that I did was to find normal like bug bounty-esque vulnerabilities that were like these high impact issues that were like actually properly exploitable. So like when we sold Pentest, our product was like, hey, like we want to find like actual like exploitable issues. But I see like a lot of other pen test companies that do like compliance and stuff. If I'm a company and I want to be compliant, I can tap one company for $5,000 to get like a very light, thorough compliance test. But if I wanted to get like actually audited, where like, you get like a thorough, like actual test to find like addressable issues, like you tap another company for like a lot more money. And it's really interesting because like, if you ask if a company is like using pen testing efficiently, like it's so tricky because like, I think a lot of companies are engaging pen testers for like the wrong reasons, or they're engaging people who are like bringing issues and then maybe they don't have a team to solve it. I think there's a lot of like, a lot that can be done like in the pen test world, because like, one of the things we'll do is like we'll engage big companies like CrowdStrike or Bishop Fox, and a lot of times what you realize is like if you want just like a normal pen test from these big companies, it can be like a 6 month delay, right? Like it can be a long time before you can actually see a pen test, right? And as like in the crypto world, that would never work because everything's like so fast, right? Like they'll launch a product like 1 month or 2 months, and then like you need it to be tested and done. So it kind of kicked up this industry where it's like, well, we need like speedier pen test, and that kind of brings up questions for like the efficiency of pen test firms, right? Because there's absolutely the resources for it. Like there's hundreds of pen testing firms that are like really good people, but like there's not really a great way to engage them a lot of times because you'll have to have an email exchange and a Zoom call. So I think there's a lot that can be done where it's like kind of like crunching resources and building out like better pipelines for pen test. Um, and yeah, that's kind of my like summary thoughts on like pen testing right now. Like,
On another note of something you know quite a lot about, the research you did on car companies. Um, it's fascinating. It's like a really crazy long list of weaknesses you found in Kia, Honda, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Ferrari, Ford, etc. The list is like really, really long. And there were just critical flaws in the automotive systems, like improper authentication mechanisms, SQL injection vulnerabilities, um, which kind of had the potential for extensive control over like the vehicle functionalities and user data. I'm curious kind of just your experience in dealing with these companies. So you found this, and how did they respond? And do you think that like if tomorrow you were to engage on more research with these companies, do you think you would also have like more fruitful results, or have they improved since then?
yeah, I think like engaging with these companies, like it was actually pretty straightforward for most of the companies. So we had most of them had like security at emails or some point of contact for vulnerability submissions. And once they hit that inbox, it kind of got lost a little bit. So some companies like Toyota, you'd hit like a security inbox and that would get forwarded like Toyota Japan. And then there'd be like some Japanese people who were CC'd in the email and they're speaking Japanese back to each other. And I'm like, this is kind of like, it's a little hard for me to follow, but I think it's getting where it needs to be. But to actually like work with the companies, they did like a really good job. There was a lot of really quick remediations. So sometimes they would fix the bug in like 24 to 48 hours. Other times it would take a little bit longer or it would get kind of lost in the scene. But all of them did eventually fix the bugs. So it was kind of great to work with them. And I think it makes me kind of like more willing to work with these car companies. There was a lot of stuff recently, like after we published the blog post where we like hacked all the car companies, there was actually a lot of like effort like legislatively to like improve car security. So one of the big topics in Congress right now is actually on like automotive data security. So like a lot of like kind of like politicians and like people in Washington D.C. I think are talking about like whether or not it's safe to be able to be giving like these data to your car these car companies and whether or not there's anything that can improve that. So I think after kind of like we kicked up a bit of a storm there and other forces obviously at work, it wasn't just our blog post about like car security stuff. There was a lot of effort like from their side to address these issues and then also like putting more resources towards it. So like today I think I'm like a lot more willing to, drive a car and hopefully feel safe. But the other, non car company bugs we found, there's a lot of like plug and play devices for vehicles and like trucks and things like that and it really didn't feel like there was much security in them and like they did have extensive control of vehicles, right, where like if you dug it into it like long enough there's a chance you'd have like CAN bus commands, and that's kind of like saying a lot. That's obviously like a huge hypothetical, but with the access that they had, like it was physically possible. We just never put in the effort because we hacked like 20 like different companies.
That's cool though that that there was enough, I guess we could call it like action going on, um, in terms of research into this area that it actually led to like starting to talk seriously about legislation, that it put like a spotlight on like this is an area that is incredibly sensitive, and at the same time it seems like there might be a lot of potential issues here, so maybe we should, start dealing with this at the source and maybe give these companies more incentives to actually invest more in security.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. I really do like that as well. It was kind of funny too, saying like I think the California DMV, there's a company called Reviver that did like these digital license plates. And then after we published our blog post, the California DMV realized that Reviver was in like some violation of some data security thing. So they like wrote them and like told them to stop. So like Reviver had to like email us like, hey, can you confirm that the bug is fixed? Because the California's mad at us. And I was like, yeah,
That's my state right there.
love California. Yeah.
It's interesting, especially as we kind of go in this trend towards more automated self-driving cars. It's interesting, like the realm of potential damage as these self-driving cars are more of a wider trend in AI in day-to-day life. Do you think how do you think society and these industries are like prepared to handle it? What's the picture you kind of see of this landscape?
Yeah, it's like super interesting because like with the AI stuff and like machine learning stuff, the way I see it really is that like with the vehicles themselves, it's like a specific component of how they drive, and like to influence that, you either have to like poison the model or find some issue with the model where like you could like seriously endanger somebody. Maybe you realize somehow that like showing like a brown shoe in front of the camera causes the car to like drive off, right? Or like you could potentially like poison the training data and make brown shoes, cause the car to drive off, right? But like the way I think like these car companies are dealing with it, there's so much attention on it right now that I would hope, and also like the past things they've built that haven't been super secure. I would hope that there's like more resources dedicated to like securing it and like locking it down. But I kind of see it like the way all the past kind of car vulnerabilities have been, where it's like someone could still potentially like access this system and like influence this system via the same kind of like pipelines, where it's like maybe you're accessing it via the telematics endpoints, where you can like access parts of the car and like influence parts of the car, which could affect the driving of it. Giving control over to AI, for instance, I have like a Tesla and sometimes, I'll do the autopilot, right? And I've driven like a long time with it. And it's funny because sometimes there's this thing called like phantom braking where you're going underneath a bridge or overpass and it thinks the shadow or something about it and it just slams on the brakes, right? So like you're going highway speeds and it'll stop at like 70 miles an hour. So you kind of think about it from like that perspective where it's like, yeah, like machine learning is great and these models are like super cool. Like, I can never beat like a machine learned chess program, right? Like that thing is going to be ridiculous. Um, I think they do a good job and they're really great, but there are like little small things that like are potential issues that kind of scare me a little bit. Um, but from an attacker's perspective, yeah, like the people who are doing AI research, it's very interesting, but it's not really my field, I guess. But
So we should start driving trains. I think that's the solution.
I'd love to, yeah, it'd be super fun. I love trains. Maybe less likely to fall off the track than like a car would be to like go up the interstate.
Yeah. Maybe we should be teaching cars to play chess. Maybe that's the solution.
Yeah, divert the memory to doing the chess. I agree. That'd be a fun world.
And then we'll just go biking. We'll just go biking and watch the cars play chess against each other. Everybody will be happy.
I'd be very happy to see that. Yeah.
Another really interesting research you did with, I think, two other people, Ian Carroll and Shubham Shah, you found a bunch of security flaws in points.com, which is the back end provider for a bunch of airline and hotel reward programs. And these vulnerabilities pretty much gave you unauthorized access to sensitive like customer information, and really crazily you could transfer points and access a bunch of admin websites. And all I could think, I actually like texted Amitai, I was like, I can't believe we didn't know him then. I want these points. But I think it's really interesting because these airline points are literally money, like at the end of the day, but they're treated not as securely as money. And there's kind of like a potential for a lot of significant damage, not just in that sense, but to the airlines themselves. Um, can you talk a little bit about what you found? Like, what was the vulnerability that you found there?
Yeah, absolutely. So points.com, like you said, is like it's one of those services that like powers tons and tons of stuff. Like you probably interact with points.com like every day and you don't realize it. Like maybe you swipe your credit card and the transaction adds like 4 points to your rewards account or whatever. But American Express, Chase, like every airline, pretty much all use points.com for rewards programs and stuff. And so Shabam Shah and Ian Carroll, like a lot of the research that we wanted to focus on is just like high impact vulnerability testing. And when we saw points.com existed and was like the central gateway for like so many things, we were like immediately curious where it's like, if somebody popped this, it's like full control over the world's like rewards points, like if you think about like the damage per issue, right? I think like a lot of people would be really upset if one day they woke up and they couldn't fly to, Mexico the next week because their points are like wiped out. Or maybe they have a million extra points and they can fly to Mexico 10 times. So it's kind of funny to think about. And, we decided to kind of look at it and we found that there's this website which was like lcp.points.com. And what LCP was like this loyalty program management website. So if I was an airline, I would basically access this website as a developer portal where I could, get a client ID in secret and I could actually interact with the points.com backend API to add points to an account, to deduct points, to do whatever. And what we realized after testing it for a while was that the actual lcp.points.com website was being proxied internally to this like administrative website. And what you could do is traverse, certain API calls that had like separate permissions. And it's been like a second, I don't really have it pulled up, but what I think was the initial vulnerability is that you could basically traverse all the way down and retrieve the API keys for airlines. And then you could use those API keys to sign requests and make requests on behalf of like United Airlines to query an account or to access an account. And I think for the proof of concept, what we did is there was this endpoint to retrieve all transactions. And since it was like the keys to the kingdom and it had access to everybody's data, you would hit like slash transactions. You'd wait like, 5 minutes of waiting for it. And you get like this like huge like 20 megabyte response that had every transaction for every single airline where, maybe somebody upgrades to first class or maybe somebody like checks into a hotel. It would give like full PII of the user, including like name, address, phone number, billing info. And yeah, like it was very like at that moment that was like kind of the point where we were looking for, where it's like this endpoint demonstrates like the world's like points financial transactions all in like one place. So it was super neat to be able to see that data. And then like we also queried our names and we saw like our data and our transactions and we're like, wow, that's kind of like years old data of just like transactions we've done. So, and then also like Ian Carroll and Chubbs are people who've been like hacking airlines for a really long time. It's like something like we're really interested in because like every time you fly to an airport, you're like sitting there with your laptop and you're like what could I be doing? And maybe you see like a United terminal that has like a weird command prompt and you're like, what's going on there? Like it's fascinating, right? Um, so that was like something we're still really interested in as airlines.
Were you only able to like check what points people had in their history, or could you also like edit points like you were talking about before?
Yeah, you could edit points. You could do pretty much everything. For the proof of concept, the easiest thing to show, I think, was like querying all the users. But basically, what you could do is just re-sign the API request using the client ID and secret of the airline. So you could actually go in and edit points and send points or deduct points. Um, so that was cool for us. Yeah.
They paid you in their bounty in points or in money?
So we declined the bounty for that research because the terms of service for the bug bounty program wouldn't allow us to disclose it, and we thought it was like a cool bug to disclose. So we just basically said like, hey, we're just gonna release this blog post in like 90 days, and they were okay with that, and that we'll decline the bounty. So we didn't. So I think sadly it would have been in cash though. I wish they would have done like you have 2 million miles to any airline. That would have been amazing.
It was like first class for life.
Absolutely. It's funny because Emirates, I disclosed a bug to Emirates, and I was on an Emirates flight the next week, and I was like, "Hey guys, I'll be on a flight the next week, and here's a bug." And they're like, "Oh, cool! Like, we'll upgrade you to business class." And I was like, "That's amazing!" Like, it was. I never asked for it, but I was just like commenting, "Oh, I'm flying on Emirates on an economy class, and here's this bug."
Okay, another one, because you have a crazy impressive list and super fascinating list of vulnerabilities you found. Apple. You published that you found a bunch of vulnerabilities in Apple, and there's a really interesting story also about Harry Potter. Could you care to walk us through your thought process on how you approach this? Like, did you wake up and you were like, I'm going to find something in Apple, or was this more opportunistic?
So it was at the beginning of the Apple hacking stuff. Uh, I'd accidentally been like hacking PayPal or something, and I saw a request to Apple, and I reported this like web vulnerability to Apple, and it was like a normally Apple I didn't think ever accepted like web vulnerabilities. Like normally I thought it was like device only, like you had to hack the iPhone to go to the Apple security program. But I submitted this web vulnerability. It was maybe like a cross-site scripting bug or something kind of low. And then 2 weeks later, I got an email from Apple, and they're like, "Hey, we'd love to reward you like $4,000 for this cross-site scripting." And I was like, "Wow, like that's really, really fascinating because I've never seen like web bugs paid out through Apple." So I put in my info to the website, got my bounty, and Brett Burehouse, one of the other people who worked on the research, I spammed him. I was like, "Hey, this is like a huge thing because like Apple has like 17.0.0.0/8 for their infrastructure. Like it's massive. Like Apple's attack surface is just like so large. So I was like, we should really just like try to find bugs on Apple because it'd be like a fun thing to do." So we kind of began like kicked off this research where every single day is probably the most intense like hacking I'd done for a long time. It was like groggy, 11 in the morning, like stayed up till 3 in the morning or something, go straight to the computer and like hack Apple for 12 hours and then go back to sleep over and over and over. Bags like Uber Eats were collecting on my table. But eventually we had like somewhere, I think it was like over 100 vulnerabilities in Apple that we had, and we released the research, which was like 3 months of hacking Apple. But one of the bugs we found was iCloud allows you to add like custom email domains to your account. And when you add like an email there's sometimes this trick where if you add an email to like a secondary email field, if you try to put in like a cross-site scripting payload as username, it's not really going to work. But what you can do is just like encode it or encode it in quotes, right? And what that does is for some reason, a lot of the regexes for emails say like you can have like name plus quote anything quote in the actual email field. So what we did is we just threw in a blind XSS payload, and when we did that and we added it to our account, someone actually, while investigating one of our other reports, pulled up our user account, and that's when that triggered, and we got blind XSS on this like really sensitive internal Apple system that was used for retrieving user details. And it was funny because the system was like so core to Apple that it wasn't really like customer facing at all, and it was like this employee only tool that was made like 10 years ago. And on the bottom of the page was this like base64 encoded string. And I was like, that's really odd. Like, what is this? So I copied the string, decoded it, and it turned out to be a Harry Potter quote. And I was like, that's like, you have Apple who has this like massive brand image. They have like the product demos, like secretive and then like to see like this Harry Potter quote is just like feels like you've like really got something, more than any other
Yeah,
secret.
you've reached the human level of the Apple corporate machine.
Yeah, that's like a perfect way to describe it. Is like the corporate veil is like so broken that you find the one like some employee who committed this 10 years ago is like the most human thing you've seen from Apple.
I'm curious, like, what are you working on now? Other than you said the gambling story, but like, what excites you right now personally about the future of pen testing, bug bounties? Like, what's on your radar?
Yeah, so I think like on my radar is like I still want to be doing like the normal bug bounty, like hacking stuff, like these fun projects to investigate. But I'm doing a lot of work for the company I work at now, and it's kind of like keeping me a little busy. But I really want to hack like some industries. Like I want to look more at like airline security. I want to look more at like these online gambling websites because they're hilarious. I want to look more at like internet service providers. Because there's a lot of like in the US especially, there's like, oh, it's like pick your ISP. You've got four choices of ISP in your area. So you grab one ISP and you get the device from the ISP, and then you've got the thing in your house which delivers your internet. But in order to authenticate to your router, you go through like a central service provider that all the ISPs use. So if somebody pops like this one provider, like this one like ISP provider, you have access to like 100 million devices of like US citizens or different people in like Canada and stuff, right? So like that's like a fascinating thing to me right now is like how do ISPs work and like can you own them? Um,
It's what you did also with Tesla. Like, I think I was listening, you were talking about like the SIM provider. And it was just kind of it's one shop that kind of owns the keys to everything.
yeah, exactly. Like the Tesla thing was really interesting because it's like while doing the car hacking research, we were frustrated because Tesla's AppSec team is fantastic. Like there were no like easy ways to get into Tesla, and we were really frustrated with it. Normally, people say like, "Oh, like Tesla is like less secure or something." I don't know why they have that reputation. Like lots of people I'll talk to, they'll say, "Oh, Tesla's like must be easier." And it's like, no, Tesla's like really hardened, right? So we decided to like attack the SIM infrastructure, which provides the actual SIM cards for Teslas. And then you find that like, yeah, it's like one company that does the management of all the SIM cards for like AT&T, Verizon, and all these different telco companies. Where if you pop this one company, it's like you can manage, track, locate, delete, shut down, whatever, like a billion SIM cards, right? It's just like, it doesn't make sense from.
No, I was just going to say that that's really interesting because like what you're talking about essentially is targeting. Like how do you choose a target? Like if you were a threat actor, you would basically be saying like what is the central choke point that where I should invest my energy, which will allow me to gain access to as many companies as possible, like in whatever sector I'm interested in. So I think it's really interesting that basically probably the most interesting and maybe the most rewarding, like maybe professionally, maybe even in terms like financially, would be to look for these choke points for bug bounty hunters as well, like not just for for bad actors.
Yeah, 100%. Like it's funny too, like from an impact perspective, it totally makes sense. It's like, yeah, like find the choke point and like that's like the most damage you can do. But it's funny because I think for bug bounty is like, say you wanted to own like Facebook. Facebook uses Atlassian products. You pop Atlassian, right? But Atlassian has like a max bounty of like 5 grand. But your Atlassian, like Jira, is used at every single organization everywhere. But you pop the central point. You're only gonna get 5 grand if you do it like the ethical, correct way, which is to report to Atlassian, give them the bug, they pay you 5 grand, then it's fixed in Facebook, Google, everywhere, right? So like a lot of times too, like I think going for most impact can sometimes be like counterintuitive as a bug bounty hunter, unless you like gamify it right, which is a very grayish area. Um, but yeah, I totally agree. It's like a really fascinating problem though.
Sort of like doing like using SBOM to your advantage as a bug bounty hunter.
Yeah, exactly, right. Um, but yeah, it's a really fun problem, I think.
That should be an interesting startup, like someone who offers a service to bug bounty hunters, how to maximize your profits. Like, who should you report this to in order to maximize your profits on this specific bug?
Oh yeah, we should definitely do that. I'll do it for a 20%. No, actually, let's do a 50% cut.
I think that's what we have time for. Sam, thank you so much for joining us. I feel like I could listen to you tell these stories all day. It's really, really captivating. So I'm glad our listeners get to hear everything you shared.
Yeah, Eden, Amitai, I really appreciate like the research and the questions, like the amount of time you guys spent. I must have spent like coming with these questions, like going over everything. Like I super appreciate it.
Well, your things were so like naturally captivating. All of your blog posts, like I recommend to anyone listening if they're want even more details. Like it's really, really fascinating to read through. So highly recommend all of Sam's
Which we will
work.
be linking to in the description of the podcast.
Absolutely. Okay, that is all for this episode of Crying Out Cloud, presented by the cloud security company Wiz. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe and share a link to the podcast, but not your cloud keys. And as always, if your cloud security strategy is making you cry, don't worry, just cry out loud.